Picture this. You're walking through the woods on what seems like just another ordinary day, when suddenly your dog goes absolutely mental. I'm talking full-on panic mode, barking at a tree like it's the devil himself. Most people would probably just drag their dog away and carry on. But what this police officer found hidden inside that tree, it's going to make your jaw drop to the floor. Before we dive into this incredible story, smash that like button if you're ready for a wild ride. And don't forget to subscribe because trust me, you're going to want to stick around for more stories like this one. And hey, I'm genuinely curious. Where in the world are you watching from right now? Drop your location in the comments below. I absolutely love connecting with viewers from every corner of the globe. Now, let me paint you a picture of how this all began. The morning started like any other for Police Officer Michael Torres. The sun was barely peeking through the canopy overhead, casting long shadows across the woodland floor. Everything was peaceful. Almost too peaceful, if you know what I mean. You know that eerie kind of quiet where it feels like the whole world is holding its breath? Walking alongside him was his four-legged partner, Abd, a magnificent German shepherd called Bruno. These two had been working together for nearly 5 years, patrolling these same forest trails day in and day out. Bruno wasn't just any ordinary police dog. This guy had a sixth sense that would put most humans to shame. He could smell trouble from miles away, and had saved Michael S.'s skin more times than he could count. But something was different about this particular morning. The air felt thick, almost suffocating. Even the usual sounds of birds chirping and leaves rustling seemed muted, like someone had turned down the volume on the entire forest. That's when Bruno suddenly came to a complete halt. His ears shot up like satellites, and his nose started working overtime, sniffing the air with an intensity Michael had rarely seen before. The dog's entire body language changed in an instant. His muscles tensed up, and this low, threatening growl started rumbling deep in his chest. Michael felt his heart skip a beat. After all these years working together, he'd learned to read Bruno like an open book. And right now, every fiber of that dog's being was screaming that something was seriously wrong. "What is it, boy?" Michael whispered, his hand automatically moving to rest on his radio. His eyes scanned the surrounding trees, searching for any sign of danger. But he couldn't see anything out of the ordinary. Bruno's growl grew louder, more urgent. His gaze was fixed like a laser beam on something deeper in the woods. Michael followed his partner's line of sight and spotted what had caught the dog's attention. A massive oak tree standing like an ancient sentinel among the younger growth. At first glance, it looked completely normal. It's just another old tree that had probably been standing there for decades, maybe even centuries. But Bruno wasn't buying it. His hackles were raised, making him look twice his normal size, and he was practically vibrating with nervous energy. Michael had learned the hard way never to ignore Bruno's warnings. This dog had an uncanny ability to sense things that human senses simply couldn't detect. If Bruno was this worked up about something, there was definitely more to this tree than met the eye. Suddenly, Bruno exploded into action. His barks pierced the morning silence like gunshots, echoing off the trees and creating this almost supernatural chorus that seemed to go on forever. The dog was pulling so hard on his leash that Michael had to brace himself to avoid being dragged forward. "Easy there, Bruno. What's got you so worked up?" Michael tried to keep his voice calm, but inside, his nerves were starting to fray. He'd seen Bruno alert before, but never like this. This was pure desperation. Like the dog was trying to communicate something urgent that his human partner just wasn't getting. Michael took a cautious step closer to the ancient oak, and that's when he saw it. His blood ran cold. There, protruding from the trunk like some kind of grotesque tumor, was this massive, unnatural bulge. It looked like the tree had developed some sort of horrible infection that had swollen and distorted its bark beyond recognition. But that wasn't even the worst part. Dark, sticky liquid was seeping out of cracks in this bulge, trickling down the bark in thick rivulets. First, Michael thought it might be sap, but as he got closer, he realized this stuff was way too dark, too viscous. It looked almost like... No, he didn't even want to think about what it resembled. Bruno's barking reached fever pitch. The dog was practically beside himself, clawing at the ground and pulling toward the tree with such force that Michael's arm was starting to ache from holding him back. Okay, I hear you," Michael muttered, reaching for the utility knife on his belt. His hands were shaking now, and not just from the cold morning air. Every instinct he had was telling him to call for backup. to walk away, to pretend he'd never seen this thing. But Bruno's frantic behavior had him convinced that whatever was inside this tree, it needed to come out. The knife felt heavier than usual in his grip as he approached the swollen mass. The closer he got, the stronger that metallic rotten smell became. It was like nothing he'd ever encountered before. Part decay, part something else entirely. Taking a deep breath to steady his nerves, Michael pressed the blade against the bark. The moment the knife made contact, he knew this wasn't normal tree bark. I stalled it, almost spongy, like cutting through meat rather than wood. A chill ran down his spine, but Bruno's continued barking spurred him on. With one swift motion, he sliced into the bulge. The sound that followed will haunt Michael for the rest of his life. It wasn't the clean cut you'd expect from slicing wood. Instead, it was this wet, tearing noise that made his stomach lurch. And then came the smell, a putrid, overwhelming stench that hit him like a physical blow. The dark liquid wasn't just seeping now. It was gushing out, coating his hands and splashing onto the forest floor. Michael stumbled backward, fighting the urge to vomit, as his brain tried to process what he was seeing. This wasn't tree sap. This wasn't natural decay. This was something else entirely. But then, through the flowing liquid and torn bark, something glinted. Something metallic. Something that definitely didn't belong inside a tree. With trembling hands, Michael wiped away more of the oozing substance and peered into the cavity he'd created. His heart nearly stopped when he realized what he was looking at. There, embedded deep within the swollen trunk, was some kind of metal container. It was old, tarnished, and covered in decades' worth of organic buildup, but it was unmistakably man-made. "What the hell?" Michael breathed, his voice barely audible over Bruno's continued barking. He worked the knife around the edges of the container, carefully prying it loose from the surrounding wood. It took several minutes of careful cutting, but finally, the object came free with a sickening squelch that made Michael's skin crawl. The container was heavier than he'd expected, about the size of a shoebox, but made of what looked like military-grade metal. Years of being trapped inside the tree had left it stained and corroded, but Michael could still make out faint markings etched into its surface. Numbers, a date, and what looked like some kind of military insignia. Michael's hands were shaking so badly now that he nearly dropped the container. This wasn't just some random piece of junk someone had shoved inside a tree as a prank. This was something official, something important, something that had been deliberately hidden. But hidden from what? And by whom? Bruno had finally stopped barking, but he remained on high alert, his eyes fixed on the container as if he knew it contained something significant. Michael set the metal box on the ground and examined it more closely. The date etched into the surface made his blood run cold. 1943. Whatever was inside this container had been hidden in that tree for nearly 80 years. With hands that felt like they belonged to someone else, Michael worked at the latches holding the container closed. They were corroded and stubborn. It eventually gave way with a series of metallic clicks that seemed to echo through the silent forest. The moment the lid popped open, Michael was hit with another wave of that putrid smell, but this time it was accompanied by something else, something that made his knees weak and his vision blur. Inside the container, wrapped in what had once been fabric, but was now little more than rotted threads, were unmistakably human remains. Michael sat back hard on his heels, his mind reeling. This wasn't just a hidden container, it was a makeshift grave. Someone had carefully wrapped these bones, placed them in this military-issue container, and somehow managed to hide them inside a living tree. But who and why? With shaking hands, Michael carefully lifted one of the fabric fragments. Despite decades of decay, he could still make out what looked like a military patch sewn into the corner. The colors had long since faded, but the basic shape was still visible. This was a soldier, someone who had served their country, fought for freedom, and then disappeared, hidden away in this forest where no one would think to look. Bruno whined softly, as if sensing his partner's emotional turmoil. The dog moved closer, pressing his warm body against Michael's leg in a gesture of comfort that nearly brought tears to the officer's eyes. "Good boy," Michael whispered, reaching down to stroke Bruno's head with a trembling hand. "You found him, didn't you? You found someone who's been lost for decades." The implications of the discovery were staggering. This wasn't just about finding human remains. This was about uncovering a piece of history that someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to hide. The care taken in preparing the container, the precision with which it had been concealed within the tree, all suggested this wasn't a random act of violence or disposal. Someone had wanted this soldier to be found eventually. They'd created a puzzle that would take decades to solve, waiting for the right person, or in this case, the right dog, to come along and piece it together. Michael carefully closed the container and pulled out his radio. His voice was steady as he called for backup, but inside, he was a whirlwind of emotions. This quiet morning patrol had just become the most significant discovery of his career. Within an hour, the peaceful forest clearing had been transformed into a bustling crime scene. Police cars, ambulances, and even a few news vans had somehow found their way down the narrow dirt road. Officers stretched yellow tape between the trees, while forensic specialists carefully documented every detail of the scene. But through all the chaos and activity, Bruno remained calm and focused, staying close to Michael's side as if understanding the gravity of what they'd uncovered together. The medical examiner arrived shortly after lunch, a weathered woman with kind eyes who handled the remains with the respect and dignity they deserved as she worked. She explained to Michael that preliminary examinations suggested these were indeed the bones of a young man, probably in his early 20s when he died. The preservation is remarkable, she noted, carefully lifting fragments of the old uniform. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. These remains were prepared for long-term preservation. More pieces of the puzzle emerged as the investigation continued. The military insignia matched records from a local regiment that had served in Europe during World War II. Several soldiers from that unit had been listed as missing in action, their bodies never recovered. But how had one of them ended up hidden in a tree in their own hometown? As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the forest, Michael found himself standing beside the hollow oak with Bruno at his feet. The crime scene tape fluttered in the evening breeze, and the forest had returned to its earlier quiet. "You know what, boy?" Michael said softly, scratching behind Bruno's ears. "I think we just gave someone their final chance to come home." The investigation that followed would take months to complete, involving military historians, genealogists, and forensic specialists from across the country. But eventually, the pieces came together to tell a remarkable story. The soldier had indeed been reported missing in action in 1944, leaving behind a young wife and infant daughter who had spent their entire lives wondering what had happened to him. But through a series of events that read like something out of a novel, his body had been recovered by fellow soldiers and smuggled back home. Unable to explain how they'd retrieved their fallen comrade, without revealing classified information about their mission, the surviving members of his unit had made the difficult decision to hide his remains until a time when the truth could safely come to light. The oak tree had been chosen because it was on land owned by the Soldier S family, a final act of love that ensured he would rest on home soil. Even if his family couldn't know it at the time, decades passed. The surviving soldiers took their secret to their graves. The soldier's widow passed away, never knowing her husband's fate. His daughter grew up, had children of her own, and eventually grandchildren. But the tree kept its secret, growing around the hidden container, protecting it until the right moment arrived. And that moment came in the form of a routine patrol, a dedicated police officer, and one very special German shepherd who refused to let the truth stay buried. 3 weeks later, the town held a memorial service that drew hundreds of people from across the region. The soldier was finally laid to rest with full military honors, his long journey home complete at last. Michael stood at attention as the honor guard fired their salute, Bruno sitting perfectly still beside him. As the final notes of taps echoed across the cemetery, Michael couldn't help but think about the incredible chain of events that had led to this moment. If he'd chosen a different patrol route that morning, Bruno hadn't been so insistent. If he'd ignored his partner's warnings and walked away, this soldier might have remained hidden forever. But sometimes the universe has a way of making sure the right people are in the right place at exactly the right time. After the ceremony, the soldier's granddaughter approached Michael with tears in her eyes. She was about his age, with the same determined set to her jaw that he imagined her grandfather had possessed. "Thank you," she said simply, reaching out to shake his hand. "Thank you for bringing him home." Michael felt Bruno's tail wagging against his leg and looked down at his partner. "Don't thank me," he said with a smile. "Thank Bruno here. He's the one who knew your grandfather was waiting. And you know what? I think that's what makes this story so incredible. It's not just about solving a mystery or uncovering a piece of history. It's about the bonds that connect us, between partners, between families, between the living and the dead. Sometimes those bonds are strong enough to transcend decades, to guide us toward truths we never knew we were looking for. Bruno continued working with Michael for several more years before retiring to a well-deserved life of leisure. But every now and then, when they walked past that old oak tree during their off-duty hikes, the dog would pause and look up at the hollow trunk. As if remembering the morning, he helped solve an 8-year-old mystery. And Michael would pause too, thinking about all the secrets the world holds, and how sometimes it takes the instincts of a loyal dog and the curiosity of a dedicated officer to bring them to light. That's the end of this incredible true story, and honestly, it gives me chills every single time I think about it. The idea that this soldier was waiting all those decades for someone to find him, protected by a tree that literally grew around his resting place, it's like something out of a movie, except it really happened. If this story moved you as much as it moved me, go ahead and hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow and reach more people who love these kinds of amazing true stories. And if you're new here, welcome. Make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell, because I've got so many more incredible stories just like this one coming your way. I'm still curious about where you're watching from, so drop your location in the comments below. And while you're there, let me know. Do you believe in fate? Do you think Bruno was somehow meant to find that tree, or was it all just an incredible coincidence? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Till then, keep believing in the extraordinary.